Hey everybody, it's Party Elite, and today we're taking a look at the latest trailer and screenshots to come out of Creative Assembly's camp. The grand reveal of both Tzeentch and Cathay, a pretty big deal for a few reasons. Not just because they're finally breaking the radio silence, but also because it's cool to see how this long-rumored and much-anticipated faction is finally being brought to life in Cathay. And though it comes on the tail of some bad but predictable news about the delay of Total War Warhammer 3 into early 2022, it does come with a promise of lots of content to be shared in the coming months. As always, with the usual spiel, if you like this kind of content on the channel and would like to see more of it, a like and a comment goes a long way in letting me know, and if you want to support the channel when you buy the game, you can do so at the link in the description down below. Now, let's not have this intro drag on for any longer, shall we? Let's take a look at the trailer first.
From the stars came the will to shape fate, hurling this world toward ruin. This burden is mine to bear. To offer guidance where it is most needed. To demand sacrifice. Sentinel of the Great Bastion! Supreme Matriarch of Nangao. Master of the Storm Winds. Daughter of the Dragon Emperor.
At first glance, you think this is a trailer for just Cathay versus Tzeentch, but then you look a bit closer and you realize it's actually a Slaanesh reveal as well, because it's just so goddamn perfect. I mean, look, the trailer team is consistently one-upping itself, time and time again. I don't think there has been a single time I've watched a trailer and not said, I think this is my favorite trailer so far. This was an absolute pleasure. I love this. I've watched this trailer so many times. That ending roar, oh my god. Anyway, jokes and platitudes aside, let's go ahead and break this trailer down using some of the information we have from other avenues as well. So this here is Miao Ying, the Storm Dragon, ruler of the northern provinces and commander of the Great Bastion. We're looking at one of the two legendary lords who, funnily enough, shares a name with a fairly well-known contemporary Chinese artist whose early pieces were a critique of Chinese internet censorship. But I'm sure that's neither here nor there. It's just a hilarious coincidence, and I couldn't help but mention it because I know about that other artist. So I just thought the similar, it's just kind of funny. I can't help myself. Anyway, considering she calls herself the Supreme Matriarch of Nangao later in the trailer, I imagine we'll see that feature as her starting position and faction capital, bordering the mountains to the west and the Great Bastion to the north. While I don't think this is Nangao itself, it could be, but I don't think it is, I wouldn't be surprised if this is actually a Great Bastion siege battle of some sort being hinted at, perhaps similar to the gate battles that were added to Total War Warhammer 2. That would imply the wall can only be attacked at certain points, and I'm hoping they're not all similar. It makes sense for such a massive construct to have spots that are softer than others, so I'm on board with that, but I hope they exist in a few different formats to add some variety where I think you'll be spending a fair bit of time playing as Miao Ying, if not all Grand Cathay factions. I also wouldn't be surprised if this is instead representative of a very specific quest battle. You know how we saw the Khorne survival battle gameplay where we led Kislev in the realm of Khorne? What if this is the equivalent, except showcasing Cathay defending against a similar invasion by Tzeentch? Either way, an invasion it definitely seems to be, since we have what appears to be a gate high in the sky. Either way still, just like Miao Ying has Nangao and the northern provinces responsible for holding the Great Bastion, her counterpart is Dao Ming, the Iron Dragon, ruler of the western provinces with his seat at Shanyang. In old lore, Rico and Robio, I guess, were two Chilean merchants who set up the foundations for the Silk Road, and there's actually a mercantile quarter in Shanyang still. The wealth of the trade route is mentioned in CA's blog post, how it's a necessary tool in the defense of the Great Bastion, so I'm really hoping to see some interesting and involved mercantile mechanics on the campaign map here, but I wonder if they'll be tied to just the one legendary lord or both. Either way, these two siblings don't get along, and that should create some very fun infighting. And for anybody who was hoping for, Monkey Kings and the like, you'll probably have to hold off for some DLC, but I wouldn't be surprised if they do eventually come. Now this screen actually also shows us some archers, swordsmen, and spearmen, as well as Pegasus riders. I feel like these soldiers are some of the lower tier units that the blog post hints at. The cannon fodder peasantry that fights on foot and horseback, likely quick to break and expendable, but cheap and necessary to work with the fewer high-tier units that we'll see later.
Shape fate, hurling this world toward ruin.
Massive city. I think this might be Nangao itself, and if this is the actual battlefield map, I'll be surprised and impressed. We've got outer and inner walls, we've got verticality with bridges you can walk over and under, and we've got an interesting variety of open and tight spaces. I don't think any but the most key cities will be this complex, if even that, but it's definitely nice to hope and dream, especially considering the promises of reworked siege battles that we've been given time and time again. So maybe this is the first hint of that, but again, we're looking at a trailer, so I don't want to get too excited, but again, it's hard not to hope, right? Especially as we watch the Pegasi here fly by carrying their halberd-wielding riders, likely an anti-large and armor-piercing unit, though I wouldn't be surprised to see a cheaper, perhaps non-anti-large variant, and maybe even a ranged one perhaps, with some gunners on Pegasus back. That'd be interesting. Now here I think we're looking at higher tier soldiers. To the left, a unit of grenade launchers that we'll see in action later, likely armor-piercing and with explosive and fire damage, and to the right we have a unit of heavily armored halberdiers. We've been told that Cathay has a stalwart and hardy front line, a staunch line of spears, if you will, so I imagine a high melee defense and armor rating here, buffed by proximity to other units of similar type, though we'll likely have middling melee attack ratings at best. No shields though, so maybe susceptible to ranged fire unless they get missile resistance for their armor or something like that. Ox-drawn artillery is looking absolutely fabulous. I have nothing to add here, but I just wanted to pause on this frame for a second To really appreciate how great this looks, I love the detail work on the actual artillery piece itself, especially. Now, this shot is obviously not foreshadowing anything, so don't worry about this one. Once again, low-tier, flimsy-looking archers in the background as these swords get forged in the foreground. And here we have a great view of some infantry. So, to the far right, you see that same unit from earlier, the halberdiers, and they look significantly more heavily armored than they did from behind. So, these guys should really be able to hold a line, I think, while to their left, you can see a less heavily armored variant that carries shields instead. So, we're seeing both of them as anti-large and armor-piercing, I think, with one being safer against ranged fire than the other, though probably also weaker in melee. All the way at the far left, meanwhile, we see what looks like, once again, low-tier, peasant-style spearmen, target practice for enemy archers, but capable of defending a flank or two before fleeing. To the front, they're led by what I suspect is the first of a few heroes we see in this trailer. This guy looks melee-focused, but we can't tell much else apart from that, and something we'll touch on later on in this video almost acts as a counterpoint to the point I literally just made. But let's assume he's a melee-focused hero, or perhaps generic lord. That looks like it might be a great sword, so maybe it's armor-piercing, and we have some anti-infantry here as well. But either way, I would imagine at least anti-infantry at a bare minimum. Now, are these also heroes? Alchemists are mentioned in the blog post from CA, and they certainly look scholarly. I imagine alchemists will be hero-type units, but will they tap into winds of magic or something else entirely? Perhaps they'll simply have bound abilities. And are these two different schools of alchemy, or perhaps, one's an alchemist and the other is an astromancer, perhaps? I'm really curious about this, and I'm really curious about alchemists specifically and how CA tackles it. We know that there are sorcerers too, and I hope they're different enough. It's not realistic to expect them to reinvent the wheel for alchemists, so I'm expecting bound abilities, but I just hope those abilities themselves aren't just, spells used without winds of magic. I hope they are somewhat unique and have a certain flair to them. Gun balloons are up next. They should be a fun bit of air superiority, and I wouldn't be surprised if there is a bomber variant for them as well, if not just a sort of bombing ability that allows them to drop one or two charges onto the ground. It would be kind of funny if dropping said charges would make them lighter and so make them float higher, and that would then give them like an accuracy penalty or something, but that's just me being silly. It does look like they're built for a bit of ramming action as well, so perhaps, when they're out of ammunition, maybe they don't have too much to begin with, because of course you can't carry all that ammunition if you're trying to, take flight, so maybe once they're out of ammunition they can be somewhat capable in melee as well. Now here we see a few things. I think these are mid-sized rifles that this person is carrying here, and these are slightly larger Jezzails. So that means we're seeing potentially 3 tiers of gunpowder foot soldiers. Cathay is supposed to have a very formidable ranged contingent, and this seems to be on full display here. I suspect the Jezzails will have their silver shield rating to give them some protection from ranged fire, and while I suspect all gunpowder units will be armor-piercing, I think they'll have 3 different ranges, and I think the Jezzails are most likely to have armor sundering, while the first set of gunpowder units we saw, the grenade launchers, might have armor sundering as well. Think like a heavy-duty but highly inaccurate shot from those ones, though I guess there is no precedent for that. They might just be explosive and fire damage and nothing else beyond that. Here again, we see 2 more heroes, I think. Sorceresses, perhaps, also perhaps alchemists and astromancers. I'm not sure. I'd love to know any theories you might have. I wonder if there's maybe something being shared by Games Workshop today that would provide some clarity to some of these questions. But if you have any ideas or thoughts, I'm really curious about these guys. Now this shot shows us some absolutely gorgeous environmental art and a couple of variants for the gun balloons as well. One that's armed with rifles only that we saw before, and another that has a rocket launcher. We'll see both in action in just a little bit.
To demand sacrifice.
Now this shot leaves me speechless. No, but of course I'm talking now, so I'm not really speechless, but you know what I mean. But like, damn, the colors, the camera angle, the VFX, oh my god, I love it. Alright, so this is a packed shot. First of all, we've got some screamers riding atop the winds of magic, seeking souls to harvest as they tail armies into war. Their massive teeth can dig deep into larger prey, possibly making them anti-large units, and those very same teeth and sharp slashing fins are likely going to be armor-piercing or perhaps armor-sundering as well. I imagine all demonic Tzeentch units will have boosted physical resistance, so expect very little armor here, and again, all demonic units can crumble and disintegrate like undead units, though they're called something different, they're the same mechanic, so expect a lot of that in this roster too. I'm not going to repeat myself every time we come across a demonic unit or a mortal unit on those mechanics, because we're familiar with them from the Khorne gameplay that released on this channel and, you know, every other channel like, what, a couple of months ago? And I don't want to sound like a broken record just repeating myself over and over. Now, naturally, as I was literally just saying, there are mortal units for Tzeentch as well, and we see one of them here. These guys are a little different and unique, perhaps. So these are the Disc Riders of Tzeentch. Now, I might be a little off on my lore here between 40k and Fantasy and now Age of Sigmar 2, so forgive me, but the Disc of Tzeentch is a sentient creature that is actually a mutation of the Screamer. They can exist on their own as discs that fly about, but often Tzeentch's most honored and capable warriors and sorcerers are gifted discs to use in battle. So I imagine the disc will appear as a mount option perhaps for some heroes. That would make sense. I think if you've got a, Magister of Tzeentch, I believe it is, they might have the disc as a mount option down the line. Maybe some, champions and all as well, of course, will come, as we can see here, in fact, as a disc riding variant. I mean, these disc riding champions of Tzeentch might present a pretty interesting blend of mortal and demonic units. Because again, you've got a mortal, but they're riding a demonic entity. So will they be unbreakable? Will they disintegrate? Or will morale be treated like a mortal unit? What kind of resistances will they have? Either way, they look like highly mobile, anti-large armor-piercing units, heavily armored, but presumably still quite fast thanks to their mounts. If they animate in-game anything like they animate here in this trailer, I'll be very pleased. They really captured that, like, kind of surfing the air vibe. I quite like it. They expect them to be a smaller unit size, though, because, of course, they're probably pretty powerful, and you want to balance that out with an entity count, right? In the back, meanwhile, you can see some Chaos Furies, the Tzeentch edition. We've seen them in action before, so there's not much to talk about there. There's the rocket launcher. And there's Karos Fateweaver, the Oracle of Tzeentch. It's no mystery to anybody familiar with the channel that I love Tzeentch. So this reveal and his roar afterward are probably among my favorite moments here, but I promise to hide my personal biases away. This is definitely one of the legendary lords on Tzeentch's roster, and he has some pretty epic lore about how one head only sees the past without any bias, while the other only sees the future and its countless possibilities. But because of that, he's blind, as such, to the present itself, and that makes him pretty weak in physical conflict. He can't see the future quickly enough that he's dodging blows, but he can see it well enough to lead armies, and his mastery over magic makes him a formidable foe. His Staff of Tomorrow will likely be his quest item, giving him access to this magic missile we see here, targeting multiple entities. Now, will we see him have access to an interchangeable set of spells that you can prepare before going into battle? Will he gain access to the spells that nearby enemy casters have memorized, so to speak? I don't have the answers to those questions, but will he be my first playthrough in Total War Warhammer 3? I also don't know. I said I was going to be unbiased, didn't I? Now here we see the Forsaken of Tzeentch, looking like a bit of a reskin rather than anything else, but among them we have pink and blue horrors. I mean, these guys might just be blue horrors, and one of them might look pink because of all the lighting, but later on we do see pink horrors, so I'm going to talk about them as if we see them here. Bear with me. Pink horrors are supposed to be somewhat formless. They keep changing shape and all that, but I doubt we'll see too much of that. It is complicated to animate, it is technically challenging, and probably more like arduous on the computer than necessary, so they're probably not going to do that. But what I do think we'll see is that when a pink horror is wounded, they split into two smaller blue horrors. Now, these blue horrors are a bit more malicious, and I suspect we might see maybe a sort of bloated corpse-like behavior where pink horrors might explode on impact and then split up into two blue horrors that fight in melee with all the trappings of a demonic unit. We might instead see an HP bar on the pink horror that, once emptied, results in the spawning of two blue horrors, like the Hell Pit Abomination, just with 2 units spawned on death in place of 1. Now again, since the blue horrors are spawned onto the battlefield, they will only be around for a limited amount of time, so it's not like you can just have an entire army of pink horrors, 20 units of pink horrors that you pop to get 40 blue horrors that last all the way to the end of the battle. I imagine they will sort of take damage over time, ultimately, disintegrating and disappearing from the battlefield. I'm curious to see how this all plays out, and blue horrors, if memory serves, can actually also explode at random. Now, will we see this be an actual random explosion, or is it going to be sort of a bound ability that you can use to cause damage in dense clumps? Or, again, perhaps once their health runs out, they automatically explode, so you'll try to maybe position them as they're running low on health and take advantage of that explosion. Time will tell. Oh wow, who would have seen this coming when we had that shot earlier in the trailer, huh? Doesn't matter, because it's dope as hell. The Terracotta Warriors of Cathay are not people-sized. No sir, they are giant constructs. The question becomes then, will they have construct-like mechanics, unable to regenerate health in the case of, life-giving spells, unbreakable perhaps, and what else? Now, will they have bound abilities like shooting lasers from their eyes, or are they more stylish melee combatants? Either way, they seem pretty interesting. I just hope they have some unique mechanics to go with them that separate them from anything we've seen before, for example, from the Tomb Kings. Those artillery pieces from earlier seem to be firing here in the back there. And there we go. Grenade launchers with explosive, fiery damage as promised. Alright, let's watch that again. God, it's so good. And now we have the first evidence of earthbending in Cathay. If I had to go out on a limb here, I'd say this is the yin lore of magic, perhaps, if that's even a thing here. We're told that yin and yang flow through every inhabitant of Grand Cathay, but I suspect some can channel it better than others. Yin is the dark side of the yin-yang that we're familiar with in the real world, and with all the dark tones here, I'm just making some wild guesses. And to be clear, the dark side of yin-yang doesn't imply evil by any means. It just is, the opposite of light. Yin is associated with earth, nighttime, the moon, femininity, and this is ticking all those boxes if it's actually inspired by the real-world counterpart, which is why I'm saying maybe this is, yin magic in action, and perhaps later on we'll see yang magic in action. Who knows? Kairos, however, comes through giving zero shits about the yin-yang twins and pulls out, what? A bolt of change, I think? Looks like a breath spell here, or perhaps a wind spell. But again, it is just a trailer. What I know is that it topples over this giant terracotta soldier, and I love it. On the topic of change, though,
Master of the storm winds! Daughter of the dragon Emperor!
Did I mention that Miao Ying is a literal storm dragon? I really hope they handle the transformation better here than they did with Malice. I imagine it won't drain the HP bar for one, because that wouldn't make sense here, but I also imagine it's a time-limited, one-use ability that can perhaps be upgraded using skill points. We'll find out more about her and her counterpart soon, claims CA, but so far we know that they're both formidable warriors, sorcerers, and natural leaders. I really love seeing these dragons in motion. It must be a challenge, and I would love to hear from one of their animators how they go about conceptualizing and executing these beasts so that they feel like they have a weight to them. It'll be a real challenge on the battlefield, I think, to show them in action, just flying in space without the flapping of wings. We've seen it done very well in other media, so I'm curious to see their take. The reason why I think it's so challenging is because with sort of, quote-unquote Western-style dragons, you have wings, you have a very grounded in reality, let's say, set of mechanics that keeps the dragon afloat. We understand the flapping of wings inherently. There's a visual kind of like, understanding of what's going on, and we can make it work in our heads. It's a lot easier to understand what's happening. Whereas with these, East Asian style dragons, it's a lot harder. There isn't the flapping going on. Oftentimes they, supposedly float in space. And how do you communicate that and make them look like they still have weight and so power, and yet give them this feeling of like weightlessness? It's such a conceptual and like design challenge. I would genuinely love to hear from the people responsible how they went about the full process, because this is looking pretty sick. Now, we haven't seen too much. This is looking pretty sick. I like what I'm seeing so far. Now, we see them in action a bit here, but it's not the same in a still, of course. So that's, again, I want to see these guys, in their full animated form. We can also, however, see a few other units here. These champions are carrying what looks like great swords and shields, while these are just carrying swords. All the way at the back, meanwhile, soul grinders of Tzeentch are waltzing along, great big monstrosities with great damage-dealing capabilities, almost certainly armor-piercing, and able to fight from range and in melee as well. All the way up front, meanwhile, we see sword and board infantry from Cathay, and some middling-looking armor, protection from range fire as well, of course, decent in melee, I imagine, and likely not too quick to break either. Previously, we think we saw at least some sort of peasant-level sword infantry, so this is probably a sort of higher tier version of that, where they're, again, less likely to give up on the fight, slightly better, in terms of standing around and surviving. But again, we'll see how the tiers actually line up down the line. Now here we have a different dragon entirely. Now, is this the Iron Dragon form of Dao Ming? Possibly, or it might be just a regular, monstrous unit. Again, another thing we'll find out when they start revealing the roster in full, with details, and again, I'll be covering all that as it comes out, when we have enough to go on, obviously. Now, this is another packed shot. We see the Jezzails in action behind some really potent-looking concoction being dragged around by horses. Could this be a support unit providing buffs around it, or is this some form of artillery as well? Again, something I think we'll find out soon enough. This is going to sound strange, but I kind of wish that they were being dragged by oxen instead. They're such a powerful animal for dragging things, and I almost wonder if that was the original design, but after the response to bears everywhere with Kislev, if CA didn't decide to like tone down the oxen for Cathay. But anyway, that's a minor thing. I wouldn't mind seeing more oxen. That's my 2 cents. Anyway, we have a sorcerer up front casting what looks like a fireball as well, and I wonder if this is that same guy we saw with the sword right at the start of the trailer. This is the guy I mentioned who, I thought might turn out to be a sorcerer instead, in which case, again, is this now Yang magic? Just like Yin is associated with earth, Yang is associated with fire, among other things. So maybe we're seeing, a bit of both over here, potentially. It's hard to tell, though, with just about 20 pixels to read what I'm looking at. Right behind him, though, we see a Tzeentch Sorcerer, or perhaps a Tzeentch Magister as a generic Lord unit, in the middle of both casting and being stepped on, and just a little over, I think these are Flamers of Tzeentch, showing up as a single entity demonic unit. Chaos Spawn of Tzeentch, Pink and Blue Horrors come together to round off this screenshot, and this screenshot rounds off this video, just showing up the beautiful land and skyscapes of Cathay. I'm pretty thrilled here. The CA trailer team, like I was saying earlier, just keeps outdoing itself. From the writing, to the visuals, to the editing, to the sound design, it just keeps getting better and better. I just hope the game mechanics are able to keep up. Don't get me wrong, I'm super pumped by this trailer, but the news of the delay was a real bummer. Clearly the radio silence was to prepare this video to distract us the day after the delay was announced, but hey, what are you gonna do? I'm just a little concerned, truth be told, after the Corn event from earlier this year especially. It's wild to me that we haven't seen the game in action pretty much at all yet, and the game is just 6 months out. We've seen like 0 campaign gameplay. 6 months can't be enough time to completely rework core mechanics, so I'm sure a lot of stuff is set in stone already, if not visually, then at least mechanically, which begs the question, what's up? No beta or pre-alpha gameplay footage, very few in-game screenshots, and a lackluster first gameplay event all make me a little nervous. It's so easy to rest on one's laurels and the existing fandom of the Warhammer universe to push this game to record sales on release day without showing more than like 20 minutes of gameplay footage, and that's what makes me kind of nervous. But hey, I imagine we'll have something to show very soon, and you can bet I'll be all over it. I'm really excited for Total War Warhammer 3. I've been needing a bit of a jump start to get me back into Total War for a little while now, and I really hope this is it. Now, I'm curious to hear your opinion as well, as I always am. What do you think about not just this trailer and the screenshots and the blog posts that we're talking about today, but also the delay as a whole? I know typically, and almost always, the go-to response is, hey, I'd rather have a game be delayed than have it, arrive on time and not be good. Obviously, right? Take your time to make a better end product, that goes without saying. What just throws me off is, like, how can you consistently be so off with your target? A 6-month delay being announced this late in the game, pun intended, is weird. It's awkward. Well, something's up, I feel like. And that's all just, I don't want to jump to conclusions or anything, but something's up, and it feels very awkward, and it throws me off, and I'm curious if anybody else feels that way. Now, to be clear, I'm still saying I would rather a delayed good game than a game released early that has, all sorts of bugs and issues. But just because there's a delay doesn't mean we're guaranteed a bug-free, perfectly balanced experience, right? Anyway, I'm rambling here. I'm just curious to know what people think about the delay, what people think about the trailer that we're seeing today. I'm really pumped again. I think there's some really cool stuff coming. It's cool to see Cathay in action, and I cannot wait to see, the full sort of roster breakdown, not just for Cathay, but also, of course, for Tzeentch. I love Tzeentch, and it's looking like justice has been done here, so I'm really looking forward to it. Folks, if you're interested in more Total War coverage, and of course, strategy gaming coverage in general, don't hesitate to subscribe to the channel. And as always, of course, a massive thanks goes out to all of the channel members and patrons who've been supporting the channel on a monthly basis. Y'all keep us alive and running smoothly. And of course, a big old thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.